Hello, and welcome back to the Phoenix's Tale. I am your host, Gabe, and this week we are talking about Prisoner of Azkaban, Chapter 4, The Leaky Cauldron. So, our recap. We finally get to see Harry truly experiencing the wizarding world away from Hogwarts, as he now has 3 weeks of freedom from the Dursleys before heading back to Hogwarts for his third year. After visiting Gringotts to replenish his money bag, he actually does the mature thing and doesn't go crazy with his purchases. He really wanted to buy that new racing broom, but he didn't, because he doesn't want to have to ask the Dursleys for money to help pay for his education when he still has 5 years left at Hogwarts. But he does get more potions, ingredients, new robes, and his school books. And it's during his visit to Flourish and Blotts when he sees a book about death omens with a picture of a large black dog on the cover, similar to the large black dog he saw at Magnolia Crescent the night he ran away from the Dursleys. We also see he finally finds Ron and Hermione, or sees Ron and Hermione in Diagon Alley the day before they head back to Hogwarts, so everybody's staying at the Leaky Cauldron. We see Scabbers looking ill. We see Hermione getting herself a new pet in the form of a cat named Crookshanks, and Percy's head boy. And there's some funny stuff with his head boy badge, as well as, if possible, an even more pompous manner from Percy. We also hear that the Ministry are providing cars for them to get to King's Cross Station, as well as, and this explains why the Ministry is providing cars, a conversation with Arthur, or a conversation between Arthur and Molly that Harry overhears. The conversation being that Sirius Black, the escaped convict Harry saw on the Muggle News, as well as the story of Sirius Black that Stan Shumbike told him. It turns out that Sirius Black broke out of Azkaban to get to Harry. We close the chapter with Harry drifting off to sleep with images of the dog in Magnolia Crescent. The dog on the cover of the Death Omens book, and the fact that Sirius Black broke out of Azkaban, the only person known to do so, in order to kill Harry. The one aspect of this chapter that really stood out to me was the overheard conversation between Molly and Arthur, specifically their decision to keep things from Harry because they don't want to upset or frighten him. Specifically, it's Molly that doesn't. We're going to dive into Arthur Weasley a little bit here because I absolutely love him as a father figure. And the thing is I cannot say that there was ever a time that I can remember my father acting in this way. But what I do remember are the number of times that I would get into trouble for something, but my father would shout, insult, etc. about what I did wrong, but he did nothing to explain to me what to do, or more importantly, how to do it. And as somebody who is autistic, which is a recent discovery for me, and learning what that means, specifically for me, one of the first things that stood out going back to childhood for me mentally was the sense of confusion that I always seemed to feel. Whenever I was given instructions for anything, because more often than not, they weren't clear instructions to me. It was like they were missing so many different steps, if that makes any sense. And those missing steps are things that I inadvertently picked up on that neurotypical people always seem to just know how to do. And as you might imagine, I would get the shouting and insults and ridicule because I did it incorrectly. Well, you didn't give me all the steps. My father, being, for lack of a better term, neurotypical, probably didn't think he had to explain all of that to what we now know is my autistic brain. Anyway, I have discussed this topic before, specifically the emotional immaturity, which is exactly what describes my father. The key part of his emotional maturity is that he always treated me and my brothers as though we were being stupid on purpose, and would treat us as such because he failed to understand that it was his job as our father to teach, to guide, to instruct, etc. But he never did. And yes, he expected us to know why we should do this or shouldn't do that and how to do certain things. That's how he treated us. He treated us as though we were already pre-programmed with that knowledge, when in fact it was his and my mother's job to teach that. So when I reread this chapter, I'm always on Harry's side when it comes to his agreeing with Arthur, who simply wanted to put Harry on his guard about Sirius Black. It's not like he didn't already have Voldemort out there, threatening to return and set out to finally kill Harry. So his fear over Sirius Black escaping Azkaban is that moment, or in that moment, actually helped him feel better and put things into perspective. As you might imagine, I really wish I had a father like Arthur Weasley, who is probably one of my favorite parental figures. And as we dive more into the series, I don't know where I want to talk about the father figures Harry has had specifically, but Arthur is my favorite for a lot of different reasons. Because he is somebody who truly cares and shows that by treating Harry with respect. I cannot imagine Arthur Weasley lacking patience when I express that I don't understand something. And we see this a lot throughout the series with the interactions between Arthur and Harry, or with any decisions he makes regarding Harry's safety and well-being. And it's not just Harry. Arthur accepts his children for who they are, because not once do we see him say anything negative to his children, with just a few exceptions. For example, and no, I don't mean to I don't mean to spoil this for those of you following along with me if you're new to the Harry Potter books, but in Chamber of Secrets, we see Arthur's reaction to Fred, Ron, and George going to rescue Harry by taking the flying Ford Anglia. In Goblet of Fire, it's how Arthur reacts to Fred and George over the Ton Toffee incident. Order of the Phoenix, that entire argument with Percy. Half-Blood Prince, it was Ron mentioning how his dad just completely went off on Fred and George when they were trying to trick Ron into making an unbreakable vow. And in the Deathly Hallows, at the beginning, we see and hear Arthur telling Ron not to speak to Molly the way he did over breakfast, and to do what he was told. We don't see that kind of behavior from Arthur Weasley, but when we do, it's appropriate, in my opinion. So that was definitely not my experience with my father, obviously. He would have exploded with fury over everything that I did wrong. And by that, I mean, well, let's use Ron's story about the unbreakable vow that Fred and George tried to trick him into doing. And how Ron mentions that Fred's left buttock has never been the same. So Arthur was seriously pissed about that. Had I been in Ron's position with my own father, my father would have yelled at and shamed me for being stupid enough to think doing an unbreakable vow at whatever age Ron was. He was very young. I don't think Fred and George had even started Hogwarts yet, so they were real young. Yeah, that's what I would have gotten for my father. It wouldn't have been one of my brothers that got in trouble. I would have gotten in trouble for being stupid enough to believe that, to make an unbreakable vow with one of them. So I also can't see my father actually doing anything to protect me from a threat of any kind, to be perfectly honest. What I really pulled from Arthur and Molly's conversation, however, is that Arthur accepts that Harry is a capable human being and deserves to know the truth, not to frighten, but to educate and to provide a note of caution. As I've been discussing repeatedly over the last year, I don't want to get into a rant about my father and where he failed in his parenting duties. It's becoming tedious, especially now that this no contact phase is fully locked in. I will be sharing that at another time too. But what I can do moving forward is focusing on rebuilding my life and making it what I want with people who genuinely care for me, just as Arthur, Molly, and the rest of the Weasley family care for Harry. In fact, given the dynamic between Arthur and Harry, we'll see this play out a couple times later in the series, where Harry actually trusts Arthur, which I can guarantee you I've never trusted my father. I could never go to my father and, share some things that Harry, or share similar things that Harry does with Arthur. And that Harry, when you think about it, Harry really trusts Arthur enough to share some of his crazier ideas, which we know were right on target in the end. As for my father, let me just say that respect is earned, never given, and he sure as hell never earned my respect. So, to further this conversation as it relates to the boundaries that I am setting for myself moving forward, let's focus a bit more on the behavior, Arthur's behavior specifically toward Harry throughout the series. Because I can't help but notice that Arthur doesn't just protect. He equips, he prepares. He doesn't see Harry as a child who needs to be sheltered and coddled, as Molly often tends to do with him, but as a survivor and a young adult who requires the truth. And recognizes, even though it's never said aloud, recognizes that basically Harry is the savior of the entire wizarding world here, and he's been put into a position that he never asked for. And I really think throughout this entire series, when we watch the interactions and the development of this relationship between Arthur and Harry, that really becomes clear. That to me anyway, that Arthur really understands that Harry didn't ask for any of this shit. So if we're expecting him to be the savior of the wizarding world, he needs to be prepared for some shit. This is going to come up again, especially in Order of the Phoenix. I just thought about the scene where we can come back and talk about that. So anyway, in fact, it is my belief that Arthur Weasley is an amazing father, not only to his own children, but to Harry and Hermione. And I imagine to all of his children-in-law, to Fleur, to, I can't remember the name of the woman Percy ends up marrying. It's not Penelope Clearwater, but Percy's wife, Angelina Johnson, as George's wife. And then, of course, Hermione for Ron, and then Harry for Ginny. He meets them where they are without assuming that they should automatically know what he, as their father, should teach them. And I really hate to jump ahead, but I'm going to, because this particular scene really encapsulates things for me as far as that meeting his children where they are and accepting them for who they are. But in Half-Blood Prince, when Harry decides to pull Arthur to the side to fill him in on where Ron and Hermione really were when they were supposed to be in the back shop, or the back room of Fred and George's shop in Diagon Alley. When he pulls Arthur aside, the first thing that Arthur says was that, am I going to find out where you, Ron, and Hermione really were when you were supposed to be in the back room at the shop? And Harry's actually surprised about that and expresses that. And Arthur says, Harry, please, you're talking to the man who raised Fred and George. He's just, to me, such an amazing person and such an amazing father figure here. There was no shaming on his part. It was just patience and honesty with Harry, the whole time. And whenever I revisit the Arthur and Harry moments throughout the series, I can't help but map them into the type of relationships that I am going to be inviting into my life now, moving forward. And I want to talk about some of the things that I'm prioritizing here, no matter if it's romantic, platonic, or professional. When my people show up, these are the aspects to their personality and to who they are that I very much want to have. I want people who are honest truth tellers. I want straight talk. Even when it's tough, as long as it's delivered with kindness and not anger or rudeness like my father's outbursts. I want people to be honest with me. Kindly. I want people who embrace my quirks. Because I'm a big dork. I know I'm a big dork, and I don't care. I mean, I entertain myself to no end. I can make myself laugh until I cry. I'm quite entertaining. I don't know if other people think I'm entertaining, and I don't care, but the right people will think that I'm entertaining and probably be entertained by the fact that I make myself laugh so much. So they'll listen without judgment or without any sort of rush to respond in any way. So if I'm a bit much with my quirks, they'll be honest and say, Gabe, it's a bit much, I need a break. Without shaming me, without dimming my light, and also getting that breather that I'm sure they'll need for me sometimes. Vulnerability. Mutual space holding where we both share openly without burdening each other. First choice choosers. ChatGPT helped me with some of these words, and they're kind of dumb, but I couldn't think of anything better, so I'm going with their suggestions. But basically, I'm no longer going to accept being the backup, being the option, being the good enough. I'm not accepting that anymore. I feel like most of the time, any of my needs have been a burden to the other people in my life, especially when we're talking about friendships and having a best friend and things like that. I'm done with that. I'm done with all of it. So if somebody can't hold space for me for that, fine. I'm never going to be your best friend. Then you need to leave me alone, because I'm not going to claim you as a friend and let you be part of my inner circle if I'm not your first choice of friend, romantic partner, whatever. And I feel like Arthur really models this effortlessly. He's very patient. He does his best to prepare his children when he can't protect them. He's real. He's honest. And these aren't... how do I want to say this? These aren't things that are nice to have. They're my new baseline for who earns a seat at my table, basically. So as I continue doing the work, I know I still need to do for myself, as well as the work that I want to do to eventually rebuild my life. I'll definitely be sharing those moments with you as they happen and being as vulnerable with you as I possibly can. So on that note, we're gonna leave Arthur. We're gonna board the Hogwarts Express with Harry, and we're gonna head off to Hogwarts. So next week we are going to dive into Chapter 5, The Dementor. Until then, be sure to stop by the Leaky Cauldron for a butterbeer. This was kind of a deeper, bit more vulnerable conversation for me. So I'm going to go to the Leaky Cauldron for a butterbeer. Why don't you join me? And we'll see you next week for the Dementor. Have a good one.